Hello, I want to thank you for joining us as we present our work entitled Multimodal Observations of Translational Health Team Science Competencies through Sensemaking. Today I'm joined by my esteemed colleagues, Deborah DiazGranados, Associate Professor of the School of Medicine, Affiliate Associate Professor of Psychology at Virginia Commonwealth University, Alfred Vitale, Director of Research Education at the Clinical and Translational Science Institute at the University of Rochester, and I am Guy Lotrecchiano, and I am an Associate Dean of Innovative and Collaborative Pedagogy and the Associate Professor of Clinical Research and Leadership at George Washington University.
Great. And in today's Splash Talk, we're going to talk to you a little bit about our work in progress. So as an introduction to the design of our work, I'm going to start off with the problem that we thought we were faced with. So we know that NIH has created and funded networks of hubs, such as those that are awarded Clinical and Translational Science Awards or Institutional Development Awards, in which they are charged with supporting faculty development and training the next generation of clinical scientists. While in part, this means training those who are early in their training years, this also means training those who have completed their discipline-specific training and are early in their faculty careers or even established in their faculty careers. And one of the goals of these programs is to train researchers to be productive and innovative within translational research teams who are examining some of the most complex problems and are required to collaborate. So therefore, my colleagues and I saw that there is a need to clarify competencies, not just by thinking about this from a skill perspective, but we needed to create something that can be leveraged for evaluation. And perhaps our guiding approach is targeting the need for creating something focused on observation so we can determine evidence of emerging competence. So our work is drawing from some previous work that myself and colleagues have done, then was published in the Journal of Clinical and Translational Science just this year, in which we define the distinguishing characteristics of translational teams, and we identified the most appropriate competencies of translational teams for training and evaluation. So before we dive into our conceptual framework, I wanted to mention some assumptions of our work. And the assumptions that drive our work are grounded in the need to develop means in which competency might be measured based on several aspects that are unique to the problem. First, competency mastery needs to be observed through multiple lenses inherent to learning. So we thought of a multimodal viewpoint. The practical application of competency requires sense making so that learning associated with competency building can result in applied, active, ongoing, plausible sense making. Another inherent assumption in our work is that we are examining competency through observation, the need for observing what is occurring within the teams. Third, we acknowledge that there's an intersection between learning and translational science, believing that learning principles can advise us on how to capture the dynamism in translational teams. And lastly, the idea and the knowledge that we have, the evidence that we have that teams are dynamic. They operate over time, and as such, they also change over time.
Let me take a moment to introduce you to the conceptual framework that has guided our work thus far. Here we're showing a construct that is based on the essence of meaning making that lies within interaction occurrences on three different components. First is the idea that cues or information from one's environment act as triggers to signify that meaning is required. So within this image, you see that there's a team working on a problem, and there are cues embedded in that team that trigger a need for meaning. Secondly, the framework of knowledge structure that we use includes a set of elements, rules, and values that have served as a guide to understanding, And you can see this on the right side of the image. So from these cues come knowledge structures, which are the way that teams make sense of the work that they're doing. Thirdly, there's a relationship or script that links the new information to the framework. That is the relationship between the cues and the knowledge. As you can see at the bottom, there's an observer, and that observer could be really anyone. It could be someone within the team. It could be an official observer like an evaluator. But what they are trying to do is make sense of the team making sense as it interacts with the cues that require meaning and the knowledge structures that organize the rules and values associated with what they're doing.
Okay, so we'll talk about some of the results and how we came to understand this in a more practical sense. Next slide, please. So what do we mean by the multimodal observation of team science competency domains? Simply put, there is a variety of modalities that provide a foundational orientation to observation. These are grounded in sets of operating assumptions that anchor the understanding of what's being observed. So shown here are 5 such modalities: behaviorist, cognitivist, humanist, constructionist, and social learning, as well as the operational assumptions that ground those. But while these articulate the stance of the observer, the question is, are these modalities in themselves sufficient for really understanding how meaning is made within the contextual dynamics of that observation? Next slide, please. Taking one of these domains, team communication, as an example, we can apply the sense-making framework to tease out how meaning is iterated and reiterated through the interactional dynamics at work in each observational modality. In the sense-making framework, meaning emerges at that intersection of those indexical cues, which trigger meaning, and the knowledge structures that organize the rules and values. That relational dynamic between them is the iterative sense-making space where meaning emerges. So, for instance, if we maintain a behaviorist orientation to observing team communication, we might identify a request for communication from all members of the team and note the response as being team contributions. But the dynamic relationship between those actions, what we call here engagement, is the essence of what we are observing and characterizes what may be affected by contextual dynamics over time. So when we apply this framework to other observational modalities, that pattern emerges, suggesting that while the metrics we typically target in our observations reflect identifiable knowledge structures, they may not always speak to the dynamic context within which meaning evolves and develops over time. Next slide.
So let's speak a little bit about the application of this sort of method of using multimodal observation. Naturally, in this short presentation, we're unable to give you all the details or speak to all the different modalities and their specifics. However, we invite you to look up our previous work, which is in the references, that talks about the different competencies that we've based this work on. So what is the usefulness of multimodal observation? This is a work in progress. As we continue to explore and refine the different modalities that can be used in the evaluation and assessment of translational team science competency, we offer an alternative to traditional methods of evaluation that focus on either a single modality or are grounded in definitive definitions about what competence is. We emphasize the subjective and contextual in teams. It's a departure from any type of observation that relies on checklists and one modality for observation and adopts a more holistic systematic framework. We believe the framework can be highly beneficial to evaluators and facilitators, but also team leaders and team members themselves as they strive to exercise competencies based on multi-level observations. In a holistic and systematic approach to measuring competency, we believe this is applicable to both science teams or knowledge-producing teams and project teams, as well as ad hoc teams and established teams. Here are some of the references that support our work. And I want to thank my colleagues for joining me today. We are very much interested in talking to you about your interest, questions, or comments about this work. If we're unable to speak to you during the conference, please feel free to use our email, and we would love to communicate with you. Thank you very much for your attention and time.